Welcome to the Grass and Roots podcast, where we explore the people working to make their communities more just, more vibrant, and more heard. I'm your host, Toree, and in this episode, I talk with Dr. Megan Poole, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Rhetoric and Writing at the University of Texas in Austin. Her work connects scholarship and community and explores how we make meaning through lived experience and how people can come together to solve local problems in creative ways. Drawing from her roots in Southwest Louisiana, Megan shares how storytelling preserves culture, strengthens community identity, and makes space for voices often left out of the conversation about climate change and cultural preservation. We talk about writing as a tool for engagement and connection, the tension between presence and distraction in our everyday lives, and the need for reciprocal relationships and public-facing work. Megan also gives us a look into some of her upcoming projects, including a piece on sugarcane farming and a collaborative effort to uncover the history of enslaved individuals in Lake Charles, Louisiana. This conversation is a reminder of the value of listening, the power of story, and the importance of showing up with care, and also highlights the beauty in being from Southwest Louisiana. Let's get into it. Okay, thank you so much for being here, Megan. I first want to start by telling you I was introduced to your work through your public writing project on Southwest Louisiana. I'm from that area. I know you're from that area. And you've written some really cool and incredible pieces on communities in that region. So I just want to hear more about why you chose to focus on that region and what your goals have been in that project.
Yeah. Well, so I'm born and raised in Cameron Parish, if you've heard of a small town called Grand Lake, which is like 15 to 20 miles south of Lake Charles. Um, so I also went to undergrad at McNeese. So I was there the first 25 years of my life. McNeese is in Lake Charles. That region launched me into what I do now and where I am now. I've lived in Pennsylvania, Kentucky. Now I'm in Austin, Texas, getting closer to home. But it took me too long in my academic journey to be proud of where I was from. Because especially the higher up you go in academia, when you talk about being from Louisiana, I would get these very interesting responses, which I can tell you a few stories about. So I kind of hid my background for too long. And as soon as I became a professor, I decided, okay, I have a platform here. I'm trained as a writer. Maybe I can try my hand at narrating the region in ways that reflect what it is to me and how proud I am to be from that region. You know, now that I'm a professor, it's time to pay it forward. The first thing that happens, I mean, it still happens today here in Austin. I say I'm from Southwest Louisiana and people will say, you don't sound like it. You know, where's your accent? Show me your accent. My husband does joke, if you point me toward Grand Lake, it comes back. But the story that really got me thinking about writing about home is that the day I defended my PhD, a good friend took me by the hands. I'm a first generation college student, right? So my sister and I are the first ones in our families to go to college. And someone took my hands and said that I changed my family's lineage, as if something about getting a PhD made us more elite or, you know, valid. I don't know what that person was thinking. And I'm sure she didn't think it the way that I interpreted it in that moment. But it was that day I realized that, like, all of this was always in us. Our family's lineage didn't need changing, right? This is the way my expertise came out, but it doesn't change the brilliance of everyone I know back home. And so that was the day I kind of started thinking about, okay, how can I use this platform? How can I use these skills to really show the beauty of this place in ways that I think people get wrong?
Yeah, I love that answer, and it almost makes me emotional because it's so sweet, and like I can relate to that, and it reminds me of just how I felt in reading your work, and that's why I wanted you to come on. So I love that you said that. I do want to hear more about some of those responses that you mentioned about being from where you're from, because I feel like I can relate to that too. So can we hear a few of those stories?
Yeah, the accent is a big one.
Yeah,
People
for sure.
ask me if I could switch. They ask if I've been alligator hunting, which of course you
Yeah.
say, yeah, of course I have. And I think I realized, like, people know coastal Louisiana based on swamp people.
Hmm.
And like that's their association. Or you hear about the casinos and we're all
Yeah.
gamblers and everyone does drugs. So I think I think I was realizing that there's this reputation for our region just being very undereducated, and maybe like we are a folklore culture, but it's interesting to go to other regions of the country and realize that people understand us through that folklore, and that lets them, make fun of us, make fun of the accents, make fun of the oral history storytelling. We're so playful, right? And so people just see that side, and I don't think they see how seriously and how beautifully we live in a region that can be really difficult climate wise. These
Yeah,
folks
I
face a lot
wonder.
of challenges, but I don't think they get enough credit for who they are and how they endure.
Yeah, and what you're saying about the storytelling too, I wonder if it's just that I don't know, we put less value on stories and just the preservation of culture. I don't know. There's something in that there, and it brings me to, I have another question for you because I know a lot of your work does highlight that, preserving stories and how we can, I guess, just preserve culture through that. And what do you think? Louisiana, like you said, has a very unique culture, and we're definitely storytellers, and we definitely we like that. What do you think are some of the most like core aspects to protecting culture, and how can local communities be better about, I don't know, continuing these traditions?
I love that question. If you're familiar with 64 parishes and the work that the Louisiana Endowment of Humanities does outside of New Orleans, they had a panel that I helped moderate. It's online if you want to go check it out,
I
but it's kind of
love that
about this.
panel.
Yeah, it's about this question. And one of the panelists mentioned culture wear parties, which I still think about today. If you're familiar with Tupperware parties, down in south of New Orleans, they're having folks bring artifacts from their cultures, different photos or different tools, different duck calls. Like, what reminds you of your place? How do we preserve different parts of our cultures through artifacts? And so I love the spirit of that exercise. If you had to think about what you would take from home that you would want to preserve, what would it be and why? What does that artifact hold, right? And so I think we should all get in the better practice of recording stories, whether that's in writing or whether that's in audio form, which I applaud you for doing. I would want people to go through old photos with their families.
Mm.
I think, you go from hurricane to hurricane, and you're in survival mode after a hurricane, then you just want to get back to everyday life, right? And so I think not enough of us are pausing to reflect on how we do live in a region that may not always be the way it is today. And it would do us all good to pause and reflect and tell stories together and record those stories. When I think about, to your point about like, is it about how we value stories? I think culturally we value stories. I think the issue is whose stories we think are worth telling
Mhm.
and whose voices we consider credible. And that's where I really feel like Lake Charles in Southwest Louisiana is being undervalued. There's so many stories worth listening to. These are the folks that are on the front line of climate change. Let's start listening, right?
Mhm.
And like the relationships to land, to water, to wildlife, that's special down there. How we're in community with one another. The more I live outside of that region, the more I realize how much that influenced me. You drop everything when somebody needs your help, and then that works because at some point you're going to need them to drop everything to help you, right? Not many
Mhm.
communities do that the way it happens down in Southwest Louisiana. How we work, how if your name is on something, you're going to do it the best possible way. And it's not quite the same as weird perfectionist tendencies. It's that, did you do the best that you could with what you had that day? And I also think no one down there forgets that work is just work, and it's about the people you're working with. The way we value who our hands are connected to as we labor, oh, that is so special. Um, yeah, and I don't take that for granted.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Thinking more about Lake Charles, it makes me think of the piece you wrote called "A City Worth Saving," and I guess this. concept of just being undervalued. And I think in Lake Charles and just in that region with the climate and with hurricanes and all these things, there is this feeling of just it being undervalued, right? And that piece is so beautiful and it's so interesting to me because I don't know. It's like what makes a city worth saving? I guess every city should be worth saving, right? But how do we shift that narrative or shift that conversation? Because even I hear people from Lake Charles who are like, "Oh, well, that's just a throwaway town," or "I don't really want to live there anymore," or whatever, right? And there's this narrative, even if you're from there. I mean, like even what you said earlier about it took you a long time to be proud of that area. I can relate to that too, of just being like, "Oh yeah, I'm from there, and that's great." So how can we start to shift that part of the conversation and not feel like, well, let's just move somewhere else and then, we'll just forget Lake Charles? Because if I guess at a certain point, if we keep treating all of our cities like that, then you're just where are you going to all wind up? Because there's more. It's more than just Lake Charles. But anyway, how can we have that? How can we shift that narrative?
Can I start with an anecdote? Because as you're saying
Yeah.
that, like valuing like Charles and people, being from there and like, I don't want to live there anymore.
Hmm.
I'm in Austin now, so I have to, I for my job, I don't live in Lake Charles, but I go back all the time, especially now that I'm just a short drive away, what I consider a short drive away. And my students for spring break, they were, oh, going to Barbados or Costa Rica, or I'm going to Florida. And they're like, where are you going, Dr. Poole? And I was like, I'm going to Grand Lake. I'm going to Lake Charles. So like, I mean, I think valuing it with our time and really seeing it as a place we want to return to is important. But on the point about a city worth saving, that was Mayor Nick Hunters, the mayor of Lake Charles. Those were his words. And I can't recall what all it meant to him then. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. And
Hmm.
I will just say that I'm hesitant to think about saving Lake Charles, right?
Hmm.
I'm aware of this like white savior comp. Who am I to save? What does it mean to save a city, right? And what I love, though, I wrote a piece about a book called Brown Pelican, because I didn't realize that on our state flag, you have the pelican like piercing her breast and spilling forth her blood to feed her young as like the last act to save her children. So I joked that like everyone in Lake Charles suffers from a savior complex. So I'm hesitant to talk about that move to save, but I do think I would say that like Charles is a city worth listening to. Like this is an area that has endured stronger hurricanes that have ever been in the Gulf of Mexico. The whole nation would benefit from lending an ear to what these communities have gone through and what they believe should be preserved in an area. The decision makers who are deciding what becomes of this place have never set foot in that marsh. Go there. The climate scientists I meet study from inland. They make models and charts and indexes. Get down to that marsh. Don't just study it from a satellite, right? I get so angry with people who talk about throwaways towns or towns that are super resilient, because I think if we want to start being honest about climate change and we want to talk about preservation of culture, we need to get on the ground and we need to listen rather than just presume that we know what's worth saving, right? Communities have ideas for what they want to see happen in their area, and researchers and decision makers do best by just listening and putting resources in the hands of community, because they are in the positions to save whatever they believe is worth saving.
Hmm. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm
absolutely.
getting preachy.
No,
I'm
no,
getting
no.
preachy.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just watching a documentary. It's called I think it's Welcome to Mossville.
Mhm.
What is it? There's something with trees at the end. I can't think of it right now, but it's great. I'll put it in there. But
Yes, when great trees fall, I
yes,
think.
When Great Trees Fall. Yes, I was just watching that. I'd watched it before, but I was with my grandma the other day who lives in DeQuincy. That's where I'm from. And I was like, you should watch this. And she's like, oh, I know this person. I know this person. I remember them
Mhm.
from Dillard's. And she would tell me about Mossville and this thing. And I don't know, it just reminded me of like it's so important to listen because people already have the answers. Like people that are
Yeah.
going through these things, they already know. They already know what's going on. They have the answers. They can explain it, but it's about listening and sharing and elevating. And through your writing, you know, I think you elevate a lot of these conversations. So how can other people kind of use writing as a tool for community engagement to kind of inspire people to engage with each other through, I don't know, their voices or their writing, or just, I don't know, how can that be a tool that we can use to listen to people more?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are some scholars who say that what differentiates humans from animals is that humans are storytelling animals.
Mm.
That's what animates us, story. We're obsessed with story, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think you can undervalue what stories have the power to do. And you think about why someone opens books or presses play on a podcast. It's because they want to be seen, right? They want to hear something that they can identify with, that affirms what they've been thinking or helps them put a finger on something they've been considering but haven't been able to quite articulate. Or we're looking for things that can challenge us to be better or act differently. And so I think what my style of public writing is attempting to do is a little like journalism is really important, right? Journalism reports the facts. Um, I don't do that form of journalism. To your point, I'm really interested in how we can use story to see through other people's eyes. And so I hope when you read my pieces, I don't think I'm that crafty, right? I think you walk away knowing what I think about whatever I'm writing about. But I hope that I'm not putting my opinion at the forefront. What I really try to do in those stories is for you to feel like you know those people that I talked with, right? And that you're seeing different perspectives from their point of view. There's this great education scholar, Rudine Sims Bishop, who says that great writing should act as mirrors and windows. Sometimes we need writing podcasts to act as mirrors that reflect and amplify our identities, right? Affirm everything we are and everything we feel. But then other times, and I think I try to do that for Southwest Louisiana, but then other times we need writing to be a window into a world we've never experienced, into identities that we will never inhabit, experiences we will never know. And so in every piece of writing, I try to give you a little bit of the familiar, but then like challenge how you've considered that place, give you a window into something maybe you hadn't considered. The panoply of existences in Southwest Louisiana keeps me up at night, right? It's so beautiful and special. And so I don't know. I think I'm betting my career on those stories being what can bring us better, more equitable, stronger futures.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I actually want to hear more about your process when it comes to these stories. Like where do you get your ideas? I
Mm.
guess just what are the steps? Because hearing you say that it reminds me of why I started this podcast. So I'm even just curious for myself, like I don't know, how do you kind of navigate the process of that and deciding like what you're writing about? And then, yeah, just like how does that go?
Well, the first, do you want the honest answer or do you want the smart?
I think honest. I think the
Um,
honest one.
I have never taken a creative writing class, right? So I have just done academic writing throughout my PhD. But my first job in Louisville, Kentucky, see, I always keep that flag right by my Louisiana flag. My first job in Louisville, Kentucky asked me to oversee a public and professional writing program. And I do not believe in asking students to do something that I myself won't do. I don't think teachers should do that. We should be in the work with them. And so, I do professional writing. I know professional writing. I've never done public writing. So this is early 2020. I take this job and I think, okay, I'm open to thinking about what it looks like to do public writing. That's about it. In the back of my mind at this point, people are getting weird when I get my PhD because I'm a first generation college student. but that's still not at that point a story. I don't make that decision to write. Hurricane Laura in August of 2020. I was in Louisville, Kentucky. And the next day it passed through, I hopped in my car and I drove down, because it was the pandemic. So I could help with recovery. I could be there in person. And I thought I knew what hurricanes did to a place. And then you witness Laura, and I had to come back because I have a job that's not in Louisiana. And I remember not being able to sleep for a week because nobody was shocked that they had electricity. Nobody was wondering where their water was coming from. Nobody was being kept away from their home, right? And so I wrote what became my first op-ed, The Limits of Grit, and I sent it to a writer who had interviewed me about going through Hurricane Rita when I was a freshman in high school. And I said, hey, do you think anybody would publish this? And he sent it to 64 parishes. And then 64 parishes said, well, hey, do you want to write a little bit more about Lake Charles? And I said, let me try. And then they kept inviting me to think more. And now I hope to write a book about Louisiana next and about cultural erosion and coastal erosion. But my next piece actually that's coming out is about sugarcane. So now I think as just doing the work of, I think public writing was getting me in. I was working through a lot of my experiences being from that place, and Laura really sparked a lot. Like, I think that's a lot of the emotion you're reading in those pieces. But now the sugarcane piece is about New Iberia. It has nothing to do with in and around Lake Charles, but it's an opportunity to keep listening and keep learning and learn all the nuances of this Cajun culture across coastal Louisiana. I'll also be writing, this year is the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Rita. So 64 parishes asked me to reflect on that. And it's been interesting to talk to folks back home and revisit a lot of those memories.
So cool. That's really cool. You mentioned something about culture there and cultural erosion, I think is what you said, right? And I had a question I meant to ask you earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it came back in my brain. Um, Thinking about culture and storytelling and the preservation of culture, I feel like we have a lot of modern day distractions. And I think this was actually mentioned in that panel that you're talking about too, of we just have to be really intentional about culture and about storytelling and just talking to one another. I guess I just want to get your opinions on that. With how can we continue to engage with all of these disruptions that we deal with, in increasingly distracting times?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that question's so funny, thinking about distraction on a podcast, right?
I
Because, like,
know.
what a great distraction. Like, let's interrupt your programming with stories about Southwest Louisiana. So I think it helps. Like, there's never been more platforms to share stories. Um, that said, I do think the problem is the way the technology is built to be an extension of our bodies. It's always in our hands. It's always on our wrists, right? So there's always so much that's calling for our attention. I think we really struggle to be still. And discussing culture meaningfully requires being together and deciding that this space and these people and whatever spiritual realm is gathering with us there is more important than anything else. Like you right now, there's nothing more important than talking to you right now, right? I try to do that with my nieces. I try to keep my phone away or turn it on disturbed, because whatever they think is important in this moment is the most important thing in the world right now, right? Um, I think I just finished a book about listening, because I think we've forgotten how to listen. I think culturally we have not made space and time for stepping out of time, letting time stop, right? A stasis. We've not allowed enough time to just be together and let that be enough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that answer. It's so true. And it reminds me, I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying like their number one advice if they were giving someone advice on like how to be more civically engaged or something was just unplug. Just be with the people face to face. Just maybe
Yeah,
don't be on your phone all the time. Just talk to people and that is the first step to anything. So
yeah,
I totally agree.
yeah.
Um, I have a follow-up question on your previous answer, but if someone is interested in getting involved in public writing, do you have any advice for those people?
Yeah, I mean, the first rule of writing is to find other writers.
Hmm.
Some of those brilliant people I know draft and shelve it and never do anything with it. Um, it's easy to do that. So you find other writers and you make a writing circle and you swap. You swap drafts. You have to have somebody holding you accountable, and you have to have others who are willing to think with you. Your first draft is usually never a good draft, right? You need other people who are invested in helping you get what you've imagined onto the page in the best possible form. Um, so I just say find other writers and make space for it, right? Go to like I have different writing groups. I have a writing accountability group where we just write together, and then I have a writing swap where we swap drafts and people are helping me with the writing. So you need space to talk about it, you need space to think, you need space to work and write, and then you need space to get feedback. Um, the other thing, though, I would caution people about, I think you read, this happens with my students. They read pieces like mine and they want to jump into community engaged research or community or, writing where we do a lot of interviews with people. Um, and I really caution people about before you do that, you need to know your how, your when, and your why. Why are you going into those communities, right? And what can you deliver on? You do not want to tap community expertise if you can't follow through on that promise and make sure their stories are told. You should not tap community expertise if they don't have control over what they're telling you and they don't have control to edit what you're saying about them, and they should be represented the way they need to be represented. That's also how I'm different from journalism. Um, Academic researchers too, like the history is to barge into communities, gather data, and then make careers off of it and leave, right? That's a huge harm. So if you're going into communities, the first thing you need to know your why. You need to tell the story about why you're doing what you're doing. But then you need to ask, and then how can I help you? Maybe you need help writing a grant proposal. You need just somebody to show up with you at city council. You need somebody with a PhD to their name to give testimony. Make sure that if you are asking someone to be part of your process, that you are making it reciprocal.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think that's such good advice, and it's so true. When people are so used to, I don't know, people just giving empty promises, I think. So, especially in communities that are I almost want to say resilient, but not in like the actual way. Communities that hear that word all the time said about them is more like what I'm thinking. People they feel that. So I think that's really great advice that I wouldn't necessarily even think about, but it's so true. It's important to really think about that when you're I don't know, when you're in community with people.
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about what it looks like for you to be in community when you're doing these projects. Do you have, I guess, if you're speaking to people and you're speaking to community members, how do you go about finding people? Is it people that you know, or do you try and, I don't know, how does that process look for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different in academic writing, but in Southwest Louisiana, born and raised there,
Hmm.
everybody knows somebody, right?
Yeah.
So I honestly, there's a lot of people I know personally. And then with any good story, if the person you're interviewing becomes invested and believes and gets excited about the work, they're going to say, you need to talk to so and so. And then you need to
Hmm.
talk to so and so. And they're going to give you a list of other people. Not everyone follows those leads. I follow every lead. I
Hmm.
over interview for that sugarcane story that's only 2,000 words. I think I had 50 pages of notes. I interviewed so many farmers around New Iberia, but it was important. If they think it's important enough that they wanted to recommend somebody else, then you follow that lead, right?
Hmm.
I believe you do whatever community asks you to do in that regard. Um, But usually but how did I get connected with sugarcane farmers? I asked my dad, hey, do we know anybody who does sugarcane? He said, no, Devin Palomino does. Devin Palomino hooked me up with one
Mhm.
farmer. And then the rest is history.
Yeah.
So I think if you're working in communities that you're from,
Hmm.
then it's just organic. And I think that's the
Yeah.
way it kind of should be.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, I want to hear more about your upcoming projects. I want to hear about the sugarcane story and the Forgotten Among Us. Those are different, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear about the sugarcane story first, and then I want to hear more about the Forgotten Among Us. But maybe start with sugarcane. As much as you want to say, I know it's coming out soon, but.
Yeah, I think it'll be the cover story for 64 Parishes for September. There
Hmm.
was a researcher at LSU who studied sugarcane a little bit, not in Wisconsin. He's an agricultural scientist, but he studied something in Wisconsin. He got his first job at LSU, and so he was applying what he knew to sugarcane. And apparently, there's a bunch of concern about automation in agriculture today. And
Hmm.
the idea is that we should get AI and robots to automate everything so that we don't have to worry so much about labor.
Hmm.
So he kind of reached out to me and said, hey, I'm kind of worried about how we're training these robots, how we're training AI. We're using all these generations of experience, right? Like some of these farmers
Hmm.
are fifth generation farmers. And that's the knowledge and expertise they're using to treat a machine and then making their jobs obsolete, right?
Yeah.
So he was like, would you do a piece about sugarcane and AI and automation? I said, well, let's try it. Um, the piece ended up being about, so much more. Those farmers taught me a lot. The piece will be called How Sugarcane Sings. And it talks about should we listen to the work of sugarcane farming, I think we would consume a lot differently.
Wow, that sounds so exciting to I'm so excited to read that, but that sounds so interesting. And I feel like that has been a part. I've heard that story in a few different areas in Louisiana with farmers with different crops and everything. But yeah, that is, I guess, I don't know. It reminds me of, well, I don't need to get into a whole tangent, but it reminds me of, I guess, just the history of a lot of types of agriculture in Louisiana, starting from slave labor and then moving to these jobs that are, becoming obsolete. But you see that in a lot of these same industries where, I don't know, it's just the way that you view labor with those same types of industries is very interesting to me. Um,
And that's a little bit in the piece now too, because you're
mhm,
right. There would be, I think there's a line where I say like there would be no sugar without the history and violences of slavery. Now, today, a lot of the labor is migrant labor, right? Folks
mhm,
come on visas.
mhm,
And it's really, you talk to the farmers, it's really that locals don't want to do the labor that this work requires, right?
mhm,
12 hours a day in grinding and harvest season, 7 days a week, sometimes upwards of 150 to 200 days out of the year. Um, it's still a really, even though so much like tractors and different forms of technology have made it so much more streamlined, it's a lot of, you miss hunting season entirely. That's the big thing in Louis. No one wants to do it because they don't want to miss duck hunting season, but that's harvest season, right?
mhm.
Um, and it makes you reflect on how we've evolved as an American culture to just presume access to things like sugar and food and not have to work for it.
Mhm.
And I think that's something we should all reflect on.
Yeah, absolutely. So another upcoming project I know you have is called The Forgotten Among Us. Can you tell me a little bit more about that project? I know reading about the preview, it was also something that piqued my interest, but I just want to get a little more info from you on what that project is.
Yeah, we file a big grant for it at the end of the month.
Okay.
Um, It started back in 2014. So
Hmm.
my first class as a graduate student was an archival research course and an early minority literature course. So we were reading about slave narratives from individuals who were enslaved. And our task was to find historic documentation from or about a marginalized community and put it online. So something that's not
Hmm.
currently publicly accessible. And then I thought, during that class, it made me wonder like why I had not heard about the history of slavery in Lake Charles. And as soon as you do digging, you learn about the courthouse fire of 1910. So there was a fire that burned the majority of courthouse records. And because slavery was primarily from 1840 to, the Civil War era, that documentation went along with it. So that results in just an absence of a tale, right? We can't tell that story. And as we know from researchers, when you only have one side of a story, when you only have one story, which comes from the white, rich, privileged folks who founded Lake Charles, that allows forms of oppression and stereotypes for those communities that have been historically marginalized to perpetuate. And I have a team that I'm working with at McNeese, the Imperial Calcasieu Museum, the Southwest Genealogical and Historical Library. We found some records that we believe help us tell the story of individuals who were enslaved in Lake Charles for the first time. We know, like just historically, nationwide, we know the horrors of slavery. What we hope to do with this project is to also show the expertise that these folks brought, how much they upheld industry. Like if we could find where they were working in the city, we could tell how much of Lake Charles, of the Lake Charles we know today, the industry, the culture, the arts, have been buoyed and influenced by these individuals who we currently don't know. So a part of regional identity is incomplete without that history. And so that's what we really hope to do with this project, and with the team that's committed to doing it. I'm really excited and humbled to be working alongside them.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting, and it's so true like you said. It's an incomplete story, and I think it makes it really easy for people to just, I don't know, you feel so separated from something when it's really not that far off. It was not that long
Mm-hmm.
ago. People
Mm-hmm.
still are dealing with, the people are still dealing with the, I don't, consequences, I guess,
Yeah,
of that.
for
And
sure.
I think having those stories out there, it's like, okay, I can see these
Yeah.
parts of my town, I can see these industries, and I can see kind of what happened based
Yeah.
on the history. But I think when you don't have those stories, it's easy to just not really think about it that way, or think, oh, that was forever ago, I don't really know. So I think that
Yeah.
that's really cool that you're working on something like that.
Yeah.
But well, as we close out, I just want to say I'm so grateful you're here today. I had such an amazing conversation with you. I feel like I'm so interested in culture and the stories and all the different, and also Southwest Louisiana, and your work just really did inspire me too in a lot of ways, just rethinking about my relationship with that area, and just being from there and being proud of being from there, and also what we can kind of do to help, I don't know, share more about that region, because it's just not talked about that much.
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate that. And is there anything else that you want to say as we close?
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Um, what's one of your favorite memories about growing up in Southwest Louisiana?
The first thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure there are more, but I used to go canoeing in high school. And I wish I knew the name of the lake that I went to, but we used to go canoeing every summer, sometimes more than one time a summer. But sometimes I tell the story to people that are not from Louisiana, and they think it's so crazy. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's just canoeing kind of in the swamp. Like, yeah, there's definitely alligators and snakes, but it's fine. Like, we just go and it's fun. But people always think that's a very crazy. But I think one of my favorite things about being from there is the nature and is the environment, and just being able to be a part of it. I think that's why it can be sad with the climate issues there too. But I think it's so beautiful there. And I think it's something we don't think of it as beautiful all the time. You think of like the things that are like, okay, I go to Holly Beach and maybe it's like looking however, like you think of that, right? And it's like, no, but it's great. Like it's nice, and it's I don't know, the nature of it is so beautiful, and the ecosystem is so rich. So I think of, I don't know, I think of that. I think of canoeing in the swamp and having a good time with my friends. That's like some of the memories that I think of. Yeah. But I feel like there's probably a lot more.
No, I love that. Well, and to your point, I think It's hard when you've seen how much like hurricanes can destroy an area. It's hard to see the beauty and not, at least I imagine, like, oh, I look at a tree and I remember what it looked like after Laura.
Yeah.
Or, I'll look at the pasture and I'll remember how high the water came after Ike
Hmm.
or Rita. I think it's hard, and maybe that's because I don't live there and I'm not there day to day, so like those memories stand out as more vivid. But
Hmm.
it can be hard. But you're right. It's the most beautiful place on the planet as far as I'm
Hmm.
concerned. And so I'll just say thank you for doing this work, right? Um, this region is so special and so important, and so for you to be amplifying it in the way that you are is not nothing. So I'm grateful for you.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Mhm.